What difference does a little period make in 1 Corinthians 14:33? So the quick answer to the question, what difference does a little period make in 1 Corinthians 14:33 is a lot.
1 Corinthians 11 through 14 is a series we're about to teach. You're going to learn some of the grammar, some of the language that helps us to really understand what this passage is about. Now, it is important to understand that punctuation makes a huge difference. What we're going to see as we begin to look through these 1 Corinthians 11 through 14 is that the main intention of Paul is to help the church to have orderly worship.
So speaking of punctuation, in the original Greek manuscripts, there is no punctuation. That makes it a challenge. There are no commas, there are no question marks, there are no quotation marks, there are no periods. So it may sound like it's a small thing, but linguistically it makes a huge difference when translating certain passages. Specifically, in 1 Corinthians 14:33, the period changes the meaning of Paul's instruction to the church. Here's the verse. Listen when I say period, and see the difference in the meaning. For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, period. As in all the congregations of the Lord's people, women should remain silent in the churches. That's one version. Here's the other version. For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people, period. Women should remain silent in the churches. Do you hear the difference? What was Paul instructing? Does Paul want all women to be silent? Or does Paul want all congregations to be peaceful? Since there's no period in the Greek, the translators have to choose where it goes. Different translations put the period in different places. If you put the period in one place, women are silent. If you put the period in the other place, God is God of peace and order. If it's confusing, take a look at some different versions, because the difference in this one little period is huge.
Now, the purpose of 1 Corinthians 11:14, as we have said, is orderly church worship. You can continue to read through these 3 chapters and you see this is the context.
There's all kinds of disorder in the church in Corinth.
And so as you look at these passages, you see that Paul instructs the people 4 different times that peace is what is needed in the church. In 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26, he talks about the church must be strengthened. In 14:33, the church must be peaceful. In 14:37 and 38, the church must not be ignorant. And in 14:40, the church must be orderly. Therefore, as in all the congregations, clearly links with the universal instructions intended to describe the characteristics of every church in every ethnic group. All congregations should be marked by God's peace and by God's order.
So aside from the logic of biblical grammar, in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul instructed women how to conduct themselves when they pray and prophesy. That's 3 chapters earlier. Do you think that Paul forgot what he wrote and 3 chapters later tells women they should always be silent? No, Paul was not out of his mind. He was actually telling them the way they should speak in public. And then soon after, commanding every woman to be silent, it does not make sense.
So in your heart, do you believe that God intends for all women, for all time, in every congregation, in every nation, and every generation to be silent? Now, I think you all would say, no, that's not what we mean. Well, but in order to get around this teaching that we see in 1 Corinthians 14, different churches have put certain limitations or boundaries around women in order to try to obey this verse and yet realize that to do this all the time just doesn't really make sense. So these are some of the teachings you get. Women can teach children. Women can teach other women, but they can't teach men.
Women can teach boys until about the age of 14. Women can teach on the radio, but not standing behind the pulpit.
Or one of my favorites, women can stand beside the pulpit, but cannot stand behind the pulpit. Women can give a testimony, but a woman cannot preach.
Women can sing theology, but if you turn off the music, she cannot speak the theology.
Do you see how silly all of this is? Interpreting the Bible in this way leads to gymnastics, twisting, turning, and changing, trying to be obedient, but realizing it doesn't really make sense all the time.
Be consistent.
If women should remain silent, then women, you should never sing solos, give testimonies, pray aloud, teach children, make announcements, and certainly never preach. Be consistent.
Be consistent, because in all the congregations of all the saints, women should remain silent.
An American man once said, "I simply cannot read any theology books written by women, or else I might learn from the woman, and that's wrong." Hey, at least he was consistent.
He was consistent.
An African man once said, no, the crucifixion, well, yeah, it makes everything and everyone equal except for women.
Also consistent.
Paul emphasized orderly worship through the passage. When 1 Corinthians 14 is seen as something that is simply trying to continually communicate the 4 reminders to conduct yourself in peaceful worship, Paul's point is quite clear. The period should be placed after people, not after peace. All churches should demonstrate God's peace and order among all ethnic groups.
We hope this makes sense. Either way, take a few moments and ask these 4 key questions. What does it teach you about the character and nature of God? What does it show you about the character and nature of people? What is one thing you can do to obey? And who can you share this with? Until all know, run with it.